He let them humiliate him for 3 weeks. He let them steal his work, blame him for their mistakes, and finally fire him over a crime that never happened. He said nothing, because Kang Min-ho wasn't just an employee. He was the son of a man who controlled half the shipping routes in Asia, hiding in plain sight to find out who inside this company could be trusted. The only person who ever treated him like a human being was a woman named Amara Johnson, who had no idea she'd just made herself an ally to a man capable of erasing an entire company overnight. Standing outside the building that just fired him, he made one call: fire every one of them. Nothing would ever be the same again. The words left his mouth like they cost him nothing. Kang Min-ho stood on the top step of the building that had fired him 20 minutes earlier, a cardboard box balanced against his hip, his phone pressed to his ear, and his voice was so calm, it almost sounded bored. Fire every one of them, he said again, slower this time, so the man on the other end would understand there was no room for negotiation. Every name on that floor, effective immediately. There was a pause, then a voice, tight with urgency, answered in Korean. Sir, are you certain? If we move now, it will not look like a routine termination. It will look like, I know exactly what it will look like, Min-ho said. That's the point. He ended the call before the man could respond. For a moment, he simply stood there. The New York skyline stacked up gray and indifferent above him, cars sliding past on the street below, like nothing in the world had just changed. 3 weeks. That was how long he'd let himself be nobody. 3 weeks of taking orders from people who didn't know his name meant something on 2 continents. 3 weeks of watching, cataloging, waiting. It had ended the way he expected it would, with a lie. With a folder of fabricated evidence, and a woman named Renee Ashford smiling at him like she'd won something. She had no idea what she'd actually done. Min-ho picked up the box and started walking toward the parking garage. Halfway across the plaza, he let himself think about the one person from that building who didn't deserve what was coming. Amara Johnson. 3 weeks earlier, Amara had been the one who found him standing at the wrong desk on his first morning, looking at a nameplate that wasn't his. "You're in Derek's spot," she'd said, not unkindly, just matter of fact, the way people talk when they've worked somewhere long enough to know exactly where the furniture goes. "They told me 14th floor, 3rd row," he'd answered. "They told you wrong. Come on." She'd nodded toward an empty desk near the window, one with a slightly crooked monitor arm, and a drawer that didn't close all the way. "This one's better anyway. Nobody bothers you over here." He hadn't known, in that moment, that he'd remember those words for the rest of his life. Nobody bothers you over here. It was the first kind thing anyone had said to him since he'd walked through those doors pretending to be a man named Michael Kang, junior operations associate, 3 years of logistics experience, no family, no history, no name that meant anything. The real Kang Min-ho had a great deal of history. His father, Kang Tae-suk, had spent 40 years building an empire that moved cargo through 9 countries, legitimate on paper, feared in every port that mattered. Min-ho had grown up learning to read a room before he learned to read a book. He knew the difference between a smile that meant safety and a smile that meant a knife was already halfway out of its sheath. He'd seen that second kind of smile the moment he met Renee Ashford. She ran the 14th floor the way a warden runs a cell block. Total control, absolute deniability. Beneath her sat 2 lieutenants. Derek, loud and careless, the kind of man who took credit for things he didn't understand, and Paula, quiet and precise, the one who made sure the paperwork always told the story Renee wanted told. And beneath all of them sat everyone else. People who had learned, the way people do in bad places, that survival meant staying small. Amara Johnson had never learned that lesson. Not fully. It was the first thing Min-ho noticed about her. She answered Renee's questions directly, without the practiced flinch the others had. It made her a target. It also made her, in Min-ho's eyes, the only person on that floor worth watching. "You're new," she said, that first morning, sliding a stack of vendor files onto his desk. "Fair warning, Renee gives the new people the worst assignments first, says it builds character." She paused. "It doesn't. It just wastes your first month." "Then why do it?" "Because if you complain, she remembers your name for the wrong reasons." Amara sat back down at her own desk, 3 feet away. "Trust me, keep your head down, do good work, and don't let them see you flinch. That's the whole game here." He filed that piece of advice away like everything else. Carefully, permanently, the way he filed away every detail that might matter later. There was a night, near the end of his first week, when the floor had emptied out and only the two of them remained, finishing a report Renee had dropped on them both at 5:40, with a deadline of 8 the next morning. Amara had ordered noodles. She'd offered him half without asking if he wanted any. "Where are you from?" she asked. "Somewhere around 10 o'clock, not looking up from her screen." "You don't talk like the other new hires. You listen more than you talk." "Overseas mostly," he said. "Business. I moved around a lot." "That's not an answer." He looked at her then, and something in her expression made him want to tell her the truth more than he'd wanted to tell anyone the truth in years. He didn't. He couldn't. Not yet. "It's the only one I've got tonight," he said instead. She'd laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and let it go. But he noticed she remembered. Small things, days later. The way she'd bring him coffee the way he liked it, without being told twice. The way she'd position herself, without ever making it obvious, between him and whatever storm Renee was building that day. By his second week, Min-ho understood the shape of the machine he'd walked into. Work got done by people like Amara and a quiet analyst named Grace, and credit for that work traveled upward through Derek and Paula until it landed, polished and unrecognizable, on Renee's desk. Mistakes traveled the opposite direction, downward, fast, and always toward whoever had the least power to push back. He watched it happen to Grace first. She'd made a small error in a compliance report, a misplaced decimal, the kind of thing corrected in 10 seconds. Renee had called her out in front of the entire floor instead, voice sharp enough to cut, until Grace sat frozen at her desk, staring at her screen, saying nothing because saying anything would only make it worse. Min-ho had watched Amara's jaw tighten. She hadn't said a word either. But afterward, when Renee had walked away, Amara had quietly pulled up a chair next to Grace's desk and sat with her for 10 minutes, not talking about the report at all, just being there. That was the second thing Min-ho noticed about her. She protected people when she could, quietly, without asking for anything in return. It made what came next so much harder to watch. There was a moment, the following Monday, when Derek cornered Amara near the printer, his voice low enough that he thought no one else could hear. "You spend a lot of time with the new guy," Derek said. "Michael, or whatever his name is. He's easy to work with, unlike some people." "Careful, Amara. Renee doesn't like it when people get too friendly with someone she's still deciding whether to trust." "Is that a warning?" "It's a fact." Derek smiled, the same smile Min-ho had learned to recognize as a threat, wearing a friendly face. "Just looking out for you." Min-ho, 3 desks away, had heard every word. He hadn't reacted. He'd simply added Derek's name to the growing list in his mind, a list that had started as curiosity and was quickly becoming something closer to a verdict. By the start of his 3rd week, Min-ho had been handed the lead on a sensitive internal audit, more responsibility than anyone had given him before, and he suspected it wasn't an accident. Someone above Renee, someone who reported further up the chain than she knew, had likely pushed his name forward. He built the tracking system carefully, shared access with the team so the work could continue smoothly, and finished 2 days ahead of schedule. He didn't know yet that the access he'd shared would become the weapon used against him. On a Thursday morning, he walked onto the floor to find Renee's office blinds drawn. Unusual, deliberate. HR Director Karen Boyle was already inside. Derek sat in the corner with the stillness of a man who already knew how the scene would end. "Michael?" Karen's voice was practiced, neutral, the tone of someone delivering a message she hadn't written. "Can you step in for a moment?" He already knew. He'd known something was coming for 2 days. The way conversations stopped when he walked past. The way Renee's smile had gotten wider and colder. But knowing didn't make the words land any softer. "There's been a serious data breach," Karen said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Client information, extracted from the audit system over the last 2 days. The access logs trace back to your credentials." "I'd like to see the logs," Min-ho said. His voice was even, unhurried. Renee answered before Karen could. "That documentation is with legal. It's not available to you." "Is there a process to contest this?" "Given the severity," Karen said, "the termination is immediate." He signed the paper. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look at Renee. But as he stood to leave, he caught something. A flicker of a glance between Renee and Derek, quick and private. The kind of look 2 people share when they both know exactly what just happened, and neither one plans to admit it. It confirmed everything he already suspected. This hadn't been an accident. It had been engineered. Walking back to his desk, he passed Amara's chair. She wasn't there, pulled into a meeting on another floor, Lucky timing or bad timing, he couldn't decide which. Part of him was relieved. He didn't want her to see this. Another part of him, a part he didn't examine too closely, wished she'd been there anyway. He packed his box, a cheap pen, a phone charger, a folder of notes he'd never actually needed for the job. Notes on names, dates, patterns, the real work he'd been doing this entire time. The floor was quiet as he walked out. People watched without watching, the way they'd learned to do everything on that floor. And now here he was, standing outside, box on his hip, phone back in his pocket, the call already made, every name on that floor, effective immediately, except one. His phone buzzed. A text from Amara, sent 4 minutes ago, while he was still inside signing his own execution notice. "Where are you? I heard something happened. Call me when you can." Min-ho stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed back 3 words, deleted them, and typed something else instead. "I'm okay. We need to talk. Not here." He hit send before he could second guess it. And as he lowered the phone, a black car rounded the corner of the plaza. The kind of car that didn't belong on this street. The kind that made people look twice and then look away. The rear door opened before it had fully stopped. "Sir," said the man stepping out, bowing his head slightly. "Your father wants to speak with you. Now. He says it's about the woman." Min-ho went very still. "What woman?" The driver's expression didn't change. "Amara Johnson, sir. Your father already knows her name." Min-ho felt something cold move through his chest. His father had never once, in 3 weeks, asked about anyone on that floor by name. Not Renee, not Derek, not any of the 7 people he'd just ordered fired. Only her. "How does he know her name?" Min-ho asked, his voice lower now, sharper. "I never mentioned her." The driver didn't answer. He simply opened the door wider and waited. And for the first time in 3 weeks, for the first time since he'd walked into that building, wearing someone else's name, Kang Min-ho felt something close his throat that wasn't anger. It was fear. The car smelled like cedar and leather, the kind of scent that came from money, old enough to stop announcing itself. Min-ho sat in silence as it pulled away from the plaza, watching the building that had fired him shrink in the side mirror. "Tell me what you know," he said finally, "about the woman." The driver kept his eyes on the road. "That's not my place, sir. Your father is waiting." 20 minutes later, the car stopped outside a private townhouse in the East 60s, the kind of address that didn't appear on any map his father's company officially used. Kang Tae-suk stood in the study by the window, still dressed for a boardroom he hadn't visited that day, his silver hair combed back with military precision. He didn't turn around right away. "Sit down, Min-ho. I'd rather stand until you tell me why you know her name." His father turned. There was something in his expression Min-ho hadn't seen often. Not anger, not disappointment. Something closer to caution. "Amara Johnson's mother worked for this family 18 years ago," Tae-suk said, "in Seoul, before you were old enough to remember the staff who came and went." Min-ho felt the floor tilt slightly beneath him. That's not possible. Her mother's name was Denise Johnson. She managed logistics for our shipping division out of the Incheon office for 3 years. Tae-suk walked to his desk and opened a drawer, retrieving a thin folder he'd clearly prepared in advance. "She left the company after an internal investigation, one that I handled personally, one that I was not entirely honest about, even to your mother." "What kind of investigation?" Tae-suk didn't answer immediately. He set the folder on the desk between them instead. Denise Johnson uncovered evidence that a shipment being routed through our Incheon terminal wasn't cargo. It was something else. Something I didn't know was happening under my own name until she brought it to me directly, at considerable risk to herself. He paused. "I ended that operation within the week. I also made sure she was paid enough to disappear quietly and never speak of it again. It was the only way to protect her, and, I believed at the time, the only way to protect this family's name." Min-ho stared at the folder without opening it. "You're telling me Amara's mother saved this family from a scandal that could have destroyed us, and your solution was to pay her to vanish." "My solution was to keep her alive," Tae-suk said, his voice sharper now. "There were men in this organization 18 years ago who would not have hesitated to make her disappear a different way. I chose the version where she got to raise her daughter." The room went quiet. Somewhere outside, a car horn sounded, distant and ordinary, a reminder that the rest of the world was still moving, while Min-ho's understanding of his own family rearranged itself in real time. "Does Amara know any of this?" he asked. "I don't know. I doubt it. Denise Johnson kept our arrangement confidential. That was the condition." Tae-suk sat down slowly. some of the sharpness leaving his posture. When my people flagged the name Amara Johnson on the employee roster of the company you were investigating, I recognized it immediately. I have spent 18 years wondering whether that woman's daughter grew up safely because of what I did, or in spite of it. And you didn't think to tell me this before I spent 3 weeks working beside her? I didn't know you'd form an attachment, his father said, and for the first time, something almost gentle moved through his voice. I assumed you would observe her the way you observed everyone else on that floor. Instead, you protected her position in every report you sent me. You made sure her name was the one name I specifically asked to be excluded from the termination order. Min-ho said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't confirm exactly what his father had already understood. What happens now? Min-ho asked instead. Now, Tae-suk said, you decide what she deserves to know, and how much of it comes from you. Amara was waiting at a small coffee shop 2 blocks from her apartment when Min-ho finally called her back, 3 hours later than he'd promised. She picked up on the first ring. I've been calling you for 3 hours, she said. What happened in there? Karen said you were fired. Fired, Michael? For a data breach? You're the most careful person on that floor. That doesn't make sense. Can we meet? Tonight. There's a lot I need to tell you, and none of it is going to make sense over the phone. There was a pause. You're scaring me a little. I know. I'm sorry. Just give me an hour. He arrived at the coffee shop, looking like a different person than the one who'd sat beside her at that desk for 3 weeks. The same face, the same voice, but something in the way he carried himself had changed. Straighter, quieter, the stillness of a man who no longer needed to hide what he was. Amara studied him from across the table, before he'd even sat down. You're not really an operations associate, are you? No. Are you going to tell me who you actually are? Or are we going to keep dancing around it? Min-ho exhaled slowly. My name is Kang Min-ho. My father runs a shipping and logistics company that operates in 9 countries. I came into that office under a different name because he wanted me to understand how the company actually treated the people at the bottom of it before I inherited any part of it. Amara sat back in her chair, quiet for a long moment. So this whole time, the late nights, the noodles, all of it, that was you studying us. At first, he admitted, yes, but it stopped being that within the first week. You were the only person on that floor who never once tried to use me, protect yourself at my expense, or figure out an angle. Everyone else on that floor had an agenda. You never did. And the firing? Renee and Derek fabricated the breach to get rid of me before I finished the audit. They didn't know who I was. They thought they were getting rid of a junior employee who was making them look bad by comparison. He paused. They were wrong about a great many things. What does that mean? It means every person involved in orchestrating that breach has already been removed. Renee, Derek, Paula, 2 others whose names came up in the records. She hesitated before the next part. Except you. Your name was the one I made sure stayed off that list from the beginning. Amara's jaw tightened, not with anger exactly, but with the particular defensiveness of someone who didn't like being managed, even kindly. I didn't ask you to protect me. I know. I did it anyway. That's not really your call to make, Min-ho. You're right, he said. It wasn't. I'm telling you now because you deserve to know exactly what happened and why. Not because I expect you to thank me for it. She studied him for a long moment, some of the tension easing slightly from her shoulders. There's something else, isn't there? I can see it on your face, he told her then. About her mother, about Incheon, about the investigation his father had buried 18 years ago to keep both his company and Denise Johnson safe. He watched Amara's expression shift through disbelief, then something rawer, something that looked almost like grief for a version of her childhood she'd never fully understood. My mother never told me any of this, she said quietly. She used to get quiet whenever anyone mentioned Korea. I always thought it was because she missed it. Maybe she did. Maybe it was more complicated than that. Min-ho reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, close enough that the choice was hers to make. My father would like to meet you, if you're willing, not to explain himself, to thank her, through you, for something he was never able to thank her for directly. Amara looked down at the table, processing 18 years of quiet family history rearranging itself in the space of one conversation. When she looked back up, there were tears in her eyes, but her voice was steady. I need time, she said. This is a lot, Min-ho, all of it. Take whatever time you need. He meant it. I'm not going anywhere. 3 months later, Harrison Global's 14th floor operated under new leadership, an independent HR review board, a direct reporting line that answered to no single manager, and a culture that no longer rewarded silence over honesty. Grace had been promoted. Two other employees, who'd been quietly pushed out over the years, received formal reinstatement offers and back pay they were never told the real reason for. Amara didn't return to that floor. She didn't need to. She'd accepted a position instead, overseeing ethics and labor standards for Kang Tae-suk's North American operations, a role built specifically because her mother had once tried to expose wrongdoing inside that same company and paid for it in silence. On the evening she signed the contract, Min-ho was waiting outside the building, the same kind of black car, idling at the curb, the New York skyline behind him instead of ahead of him this time. "You didn't have to create a position for me," she said, walking toward him. "I didn't create it for you," he said. "I created it because your mother should have had it 18 years ago. You're the one who's actually going to do the job well." She almost smiled. "That's a very careful non-answer. I learned careful a long time ago." He opened the car door for her. "It served me well so far." Amara paused before getting in, looking at him the way she had that very first morning, direct, unflinching, the kind of look that made powerful men remember they were still just men. "For the record," she said, "I still think you should have told me who you were on day one." "For the record," he answered, "I think you would have treated me exactly the same either way." She didn't argue with that. She got in the car instead, and as it pulled away from the curb, Min-ho understood, finally, what his father had meant 3 months earlier in that quiet study. Some debts take 18 years to come due, and some people are worth becoming someone new to protect.